Scythe just came out with their newest, biggest, fattest, beefiest, more adjectives, cooler, and it's the Fuma 3. But what has changed? On the first look, not a lot, but actually kind of everything. We might still have a dual tower 6 heat pipe air cooler in front of us, rocking a 50mm thick reverse spinning case.
風、あなたの RGB 嫌いの豚の発音を学びましょう。
Yeah, Kaze, Flex 2 Slim in the front and a regular one in the center, but apart from that, Scythe has worked on every little detail about this. Just look at the heatsink. Before we had a very spacious design with the fins protruding on one side, creating a kind of an X pattern from left to right. Now we got a way less spacious design with completely straight fins. But the important part here is the density. Ignoring the top cover, the actual fin part of the heatsink is still about 103mm high. And on the old one, we are looking at a total of 49 fins. And the new one, there we got 52, so a bit more fins per inch. But that's not all. The base actually got slightly wider. It may just be 2mm, but the heat pipes can now make more contact with the copper nickel plated base. We can go on and on and on about the changes, but before we continue with that, let's just have a look at the benchmarks. We reran all of our big Scythe coolers on top of our new CPU cooler benchmark machine using all three preset workloads. And already at 120 watts going through the socket, the updated Fuma 3 showed that it was worth it. Keeping the CPU at 35.2 degrees C above ambient, the little updates managed to push the overall temperature down by almost a full degree C. After slowly lowering the fan speed, we were able to observe that this is an overall improvement all across the board. From start to finish, the Fuma 3 was a tick in front of the Fuma 2 Rev.B and quite the big tick in front of the Mugen 5. Interesting to note here is that the max noise level is actually slightly higher. This is most certainly due to the heatsink being denser, meaning that air has to squish through, more fins, or it will hit more fins, thus create more noise, or more resistance, which will then create more noise. But thankfully not loud enough to make the overall performance worse. Even with that added noise now, which is like point something dB, the Fuma 3 is definitely an upgrade. Over on the 250 watts workload, we saw exactly what we wanted to see. At 68.2 degrees C above ambient, the difference to the Fuma 2 now became almost 4 degrees C. That's an upgrade. And at this point, the Fuma 3 is actually not barely making the list, but it's playing with the big boys like the GameDS Boreas P1 and even beating an Arctic Liquid Freezer 240. But the interesting part is still the noise to performance ratio, because instead of just being a tiny smudge on the graph, the Fuma 3 now creates a whole line. Given that it's still quite behind something like a Nokia NHD15, but it's playing in the big boy league now. For the 320 watts workload, no air cooler has managed so far to keep up that workload indefinitely, and I don't see that happening in the near future anyway, but he tried, he failed, and like everybody else. At this point, let's talk a bit more about the cooler itself, as if the Fuma 2 never existed. Design-wise, we got a fully aluminum silver heatsink with two black covers hiding the two towers, similarly to what we have seen on the new Kotetsu. It's definitely a simple design, but the matte black top with the two Scythe logos that are stamped in it definitely does look kinda premium. In the front of the cooler we got that Kaze Flex 2 Slim spinning at up to 1500 RPM whilst pushing 39.44 CFM at 0.96mm of H2O. In the center we got the regular one spinning at the same 1500 RPM, but at that point pushing 67.62 CFM at 1.5mm of H2O. It's way more performance because it's thicker. And in case this still isn't enough for you, next to the mounting hardware for every relevant socket, some thermal paste and a PWM splitter, Scythe made sure to include an additional set of fan clips for you to mount a third fan to the back of the cooler in case you really need it, or You can also just replace the front one with a regular one, which is also an option. Or just 3 regular ones. You can do whatever the hell you want. Standing on the table, the cooler measures 154 millimeters in height, so it's very compatible with the average mid-tower case. And it's about 130 millimeters wide. However, thanks to the heat pipes being bent to that ridiculous degree that they are, and the fact that the right heatsink is a lot smaller, plus the very slim fan in the front, we are looking at a 100% RAM compatibility here. But let's get to the mounting hardware, because Scythe updated their hyper precision mounting system HPMS to version 5, which in my opinion was kind of a downgrade. It's still functionally identical, but it feels worse. To install it on Intel, we position the backplate where it's supposed to be, shove the spacers on from the other side, position the Intel brackets with the edges on the outer side, and screw them down using the thumb screws. Over on AMD, we need to remove the retention brackets, then slap the spacers on the leftover backplate, put the AMD brackets on top and screw them down using the longer screws. From there, on both platforms, slap the cooler on top and screw it down. On a quite good side note, you can install the cooler with the fans pre-mounted. There are grooves in the little heatsink that allow you to shove the screwdriver like in between the thick fan and the heatsink, so no need to remove the fan at all. But I prefer the old mounting hardware. The only part that really changed are the retention brackets for AMD and Intel, and honestly, they were perfectly fine. The whole concept didn't change at all. It now just feels a lot cheaper. I don't know. The old one it looked like something. The new one is just like a straight aluminum plate with an edge. I don't know. I think, or I hope, it's a cost saving measure. You can clearly see that these brackets now are way simpler, and it does give the vibe that the old ones were just much more expensive to produce without giving you any like actual benefit. So as a whole, I see it unfortunate in my opinion, but I do get it if it allows Scythe to keep the cooler at a better price, because functionally it's one-to-one the same thing. There is no other step involved in installing it. So where do we stand? I love it. I might hate the mounting system, but Scythe did some amazing work here, as in upgraded what they already had. It's not a new cooler, but this is what I expect from an update. The design slightly changed, to the better or worse, that's up to you to decide, but the performance part of the cooler got updated across the board. And everything in here is a bit better. There is just no debate about that. The heatsink is now performing better, and the fans are now capable of utilizing a lot more of their potential performance, as we have seen in the benchmarks, because it's the same fans as on the Fuma 2. The whole thing does look like a phone update to me. From far, if you're not used to looking at these things for hours, you might think it's exactly the same thing as last year, but Scythe definitely took some time, refined a lot of little things, and they squeezed a few degrees or few percent of performance out of the old design, improved the overall thing, and here we are. And it's definitely not just a more fins thing and then call it a day. Before we had one tower at 36mm and the other one at 50mm thickness. And on version 3 we have one at 28 and the other one at 54. So the right tower is now quite a bit thinner than it was before, and I don't think this is a coincidence. I think this is by design to make sure that the 15mm thick fan can still keep up with the one in the center, or that the thickness of the right heatsink will not somehow block its potential. Anyway, it's the little things that we believe Scythe did a great job taking something that was already pretty good and then making it a tick better in every possible way. Except for the mounting system, it just feels like I did these brackets by myself in the workshop. And as far as we are concerned, the best price I saw here in Europe was $52.90, and that's a very good price. That paired with a 13700K 7800X3D makes for a great combination. Not an i9 Ryzen 9, that's a bit much, but for a gaming PC with a more gaming focused CPU, or everything like below or 9 i9, that's a great combo. Anyway, I think this should be it for Scythe and their Fuma too. At this point, a huge thank you to them for sending it over. And on a side note, we also have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is down below. And of course, we still have channel membership, so if you're looking for a good way to sell your soul for an RG poop emoji, that's a pretty good way to go. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but it will also serve to finally get that goddamn katana, because Scythe boxes deserve to be opened with a katana. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you want to continue, have a look at what happens when we slap an 8 heat pipes direct touch server cooler on top of a regular i9. It's not what you would expect. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.
万歳、クトゥルフ教。